Real people, real confessions, the stories you weren't supposed to hear. Welcome to Beyond Reddit Stories. I never thought a reunion would make me sweat more than the actual exam. It happened last Friday night, at this dimly lit bar downtown, where my old classmates had decided to relive the glory days, or, in my case, the days I spent strategically avoiding glory altogether. I was halfway through my second beer when I saw him. Daniel, the guy everyone used to call our class's moral compass. The one who always reminded the teacher to collect homework, who never cheated, never swore, and somehow still managed to be liked by everyone. He walked right up to me, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Hey," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "I've been meaning to thank you for years. You saved my life in that history exam." My first thought? Oh, no. Because here's the thing, I didn't save him. If anything, I saved myself and used him as collateral. I nodded, pretending to be confused, praying he'd just drop it. But Daniel wasn't the type to let a thank you go unacknowledged. "No, seriously," he insisted. "If you hadn't stepped in and fixed my answers, I'd have failed. I don't even know how you pulled it off without anyone noticing. You were a hero that day." Hero? Right. That's one word for it. There are others I could think of, but none of them are printable. I took a slow sip of my drink, hoping the alcohol might blur the edges of the memory he'd just yanked into sharp focus, but it didn't. In fact, I remembered everything, every frantic heartbeat, every bead of sweat, and that split-second decision that changed both of our fates. And if you're wondering how a so-called heroic rescue could actually be one of the most selfish things I've ever done, well, you're about to find out. Back then, I wasn't the kind of student who made waves. I wasn't top of the class, but I wasn't failing either. I lived in that sweet middle ground where teachers barely remembered your name unless you did something wrong. I liked it that way, invisible was safe. My parents, though, they had bigger dreams for me, the kind that came with lectures about potential and wasted talent every time a report card came home. They wanted scholarships, top universities, the works. I just wanted to get through school without collapsing from stress. Daniel was the opposite. He was the golden boy, the kid teachers trusted to collect exam papers without peeking, the one who could trip in the hallway and somehow turn it into a public service announcement about safety. He didn't just study, he thrived. Straight A's, leadership roles, awards that gathered dust in the school's glass display case. We weren't close friends, but we were orbiting acquaintances, the kind who share the same study groups, swap notes, maybe eat lunch together if everyone else was busy. And in those shared moments, I noticed things about him, little habits, the way he wrote his answers in a specific order, always double-checking before moving on, how he left the room to sharpen his pencil at the same time during every exam. At the time, it felt like harmless observation. Later, I realized it was the blueprint for everything that happened. The school itself didn't make things easy. We were in our final year, and the pressure was suffocating. The history exam, the one Daniel now thanks me for, wasn't just another test. It was the make-or-break moment that decided whether you got into the good universities or, well, didn't. For me, that year was a slow descent into panic. I'd been juggling too many subjects, pulling too many late nights, and my brain felt like it was stuffed with wet cotton. Every mock exam score came back worse than the last. I started calculating odds, making mental lists of safe classes versus the ones that could sink me. History was a torpedo headed straight for my transcript. Still, even then, I had no plan, no scheme, not until a few days before the exam, when something small, something I shouldn't even have noticed, planted the seed. But that, I'll get to in a minute. The seed was planted in the most boring way imaginable, a routine exam in math class, 2 weeks before the big history test. It was the kind of morning where the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than the students. We sat in neat rows, the air smelling faintly of pencil shavings and teenage nerves. The exam started, papers shuffled, and I noticed something so simple, so small, it almost didn't register. Our teacher, Mrs. Grant, collected the answer sheets in reverse row order, not the same way every time, but often enough to make it predictable. She'd stack them face down, then walk them to the front. No one double-checked whose paper was whose until after grading. I remember watching her pass by, her hands full of identical-looking sheets, and thinking if someone wanted to switch things around, they could. It wasn't a plan yet, more like a passing shadow of a thought, but it lingered. When the math test came back, something else happened. Daniel got the top score, as always, but I noticed he'd made a tiny error, a wrong sign in the middle of a problem. Nothing major, but enough to drop his grade if it had been caught. He'd laughed about it later, saying, "Lucky for me, Mrs. Grant probably thought it was a slip of the pen." That's when it clicked. Even Daniel, the perfect student, wasn't infallible. And in an exam setting, the smallest change could swing an outcome. Fast forward to the morning of the history exam. The sky outside was dull and gray, the kind that made you feel like time had stopped. Inside the classroom, it was a battlefield of quiet panic. Pens clicked nervously, chairs scraped, and the scratch of pencil on paper was the only soundtrack. I sat 2 rows ahead of Daniel, close enough to hear his steady, controlled breathing. My own was a mess, shallow, uneven, fueled by too much caffeine and not enough confidence. The questions on the paper looked like they'd been written in another language. My stomach sank. I could answer maybe half of them with certainty. The rest was educated guessing at best. That's when my eyes wandered. 2 rows back, Daniel's pencil moved in sure. Clean lines, no hesitation. His posture was the picture of calm. And in that moment, the idea stopped being a shadow. It became a plan. All I had to do was wait. Wait for the moment the papers were collected. Wait for that predictable reverse row sweep. Wait for the tiny crack in the system to open wide enough for me to slip through. But waiting, I'd learn, was the easy part. Pulling it off without getting caught, that was where the real danger lived. The final minutes of the history exam were like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the wind to either push you forward or let you stay balanced. Mrs. Grant's voice cut through the silence. 2 minutes left, chairs creaked, pens scratched faster, and then, like clockwork, she started her slow walk down the first row, collecting papers one by one, stacking them neatly, face down. I'd been rehearsing this moment in my head since the second I saw Daniel's confident posture an hour ago. My pulse was so loud it felt like everyone could hear it. Row 1, row 2, she was getting closer. I kept my eyes on my paper, pretending to review my answers while watching her shadow inch toward me. The trick was to look utterly unremarkable, average, not worth noticing. She reached my desk. I slid my paper onto the stack without a word, my hands steady on the outside but damp with sweat inside my sleeves. Row 4, row 5. She moved to Daniel. I didn't turn around, but I could sense it, the faint shuffle of his paper joining the pile, the way he exhaled like a man who'd just nailed every question. Then came the moment. Mrs. Grant set the stack on her desk at the front, turned to write something on the board attendance, probably and for 5 seconds. The ungraded history of our entire class sat unguarded, waiting. 5 seconds, that was all I had. I stood up, feigning a stretch, murmured something about needing to sharpen my pencil before the next period. My heart pounded so violently it almost made me dizzy. I walked past her desk, slow enough to look casual, fast enough to beat her glance back toward the papers. My right hand rested on the edge of the stack like I was steadying myself, and in one smooth, practiced motion, I lifted the top few papers, slid mine down 2 spots, and swapped Daniel's up into my hands. The sound of paper sliding against paper was deafening in my ears. No one looked up. Not yet. I sat back down, my new paper in front of me. My pencil scratched furiously, just enough changes to knock Daniel down from his perfect score without making it obvious. A wrong date here, a misattributed battle there. Just enough to tip the balance. By the time Mrs. Grant turned around, the papers were stacked again on her desk, perfectly innocent. The whole thing had taken maybe 12 seconds. But in my head, it was an hour. Every second. I expected someone to shout my name, to feel a hand on my shoulder, to be marched out of the room in disgrace. It didn't happen. When the grades came back a week later, mine was higher than I'd ever seen, a glorious, life-saving number. Daniel's, still a pass, though just barely. I should have felt safe, relieved, victorious, even. But instead, a knot formed in my stomach. Because instead of suspecting foul play, Daniel sought me out after class, smiling like I'd done him the greatest favor of his life. And then, he said the words that have been echoing in my head ever since. Thanks, man. I don't know how you did it, but you saved me. Years went by. The history exam became just another dusty page in the scrapbook of my high school years. I went to university, built a career, collected experiences that made the memory of that day fade into the background, mostly. But every so often, something would bring it back. A stack of papers on a desk, the quiet shuffle of test booklets, the smell of sharpened pencils. And I'd remember I hadn't been the hero of that story. I'd been its opportunist. Yet life moved on. Daniel and I stayed loosely connected, a few texts a year, the occasional happy birthday on social media. No one else ever mentioned the history exam. Until that reunion, he stood there, drink in hand, telling anyone who'd listen about the time I saved his future. People laughed, clapped me on the back, called me clever, resourceful. Not a single person guessed the truth. And then, just as the group's attention drifted elsewhere, Daniel leaned toward me and said quietly, "You know, I've always wondered how you switched those papers without Miss Grant noticing." My blood went cold. I opened my mouth, searching for the right combination of denial and casual deflection. But he didn't give me the chance. "I mean," he continued, "it's not like I didn't notice my answers weren't quite mine. But I figured you must have had your reasons." He smiled, not accusing, not angry, almost amused. "I never said anything because, well, you passed, I passed, everyone won, right?" And with that, he walked away, leaving me standing there with the sudden, dizzying realization. The one person I'd been hiding the truth from had known all along. It's strange we tell ourselves certain actions are secrets, locked away forever, but sometimes the other person's been holding the key the entire time, choosing not to use it. Maybe that's trust, maybe it's mercy, or maybe it's just another layer of the game we all play with the truth. So I'll leave you with this. Have you ever been thanked for something you didn't actually do, or worse, something you did for the wrong reasons? And if the other person knew the truth, would you even want to find out? So now you know the story Daniel's been telling for years, and the version I've been keeping to myself. They're not the same story. And maybe that's the point. Maybe truth isn't a single, solid thing. Maybe it bends depending on who's holding it. But here's where I want to hear from you. If you were in Daniel's place, would you have confronted me back then? Would you have kept the secret like he did? Or would you have told everyone the truth the moment you realized it? And if you were me standing there, with someone thanking you for something you didn't exactly do for noble reasons, would you confess? Or would you just let the myth live on? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm not just curious. I'm ready for the arguments, the you were wrong and the you did what you had to do, because I've been turning this over in my head for years, and I still don't know if I was the villain or the reluctant hero. While you're here, hit subscribe and like if you want more stories that dig into the messy, blurry lines between right and wrong, because trust me, this wasn't the only time I crossed one.